Hi, welcome to Rainier Avenue Radio's Call to Conscience, a celebration and education of Black History Month. I'm Jasmine Kendrick, and all month long in February, we will be showcasing musical performances, dance exhibitions, race and justice discussions, as well as workshops. Every Friday, we host our Friday Family Black Film Night, showcasing films by Black filmmakers. We'll bring you Black celebrations from around the world, including Africa, France, and British Columbia, Canada. This comprehensive celebration, which will also explore the Hartsfield Slave Quote Collection, the 100-year anniversary of the destruction of Black Wall Street, and interviews with Seattle Black history makers, is all powered by and thanks to the Urban League of Metropolitan Seattle. Today's guest is Elmer Dixon, co-founder of Seattle's Black Panther Party. Mr. Dixon, thank you so much for taking the time to meet today. It's an incredible honor.
Thank you. It's my pleasure, my privilege to be here. I always like, sharing information that people may not be aware of.
Awesome. Well, one of the things that my co-hosts and we love to ask, especially during this month, is, what does Black History Month mean to you? And how do you like to celebrate it or honor our history?
Well, Black History Month, I think many people today realize that Black history is not confined to a month. So it means several things. One is that at least there is a time during the year when we can highlight the accomplishments as well as the pain and suffering of our community. And with one day being able to move it, with the hope being able to move it to a broader platform so that it is not celebrated just in one month, but throughout the year. So it means an opportunity, I think, for me, for myself personally to be able to share, but also for our community to look back and reflect and learn about our history, because history is something that has been hidden and kept from us.
Thank you. I really appreciate that answer, because I truly, the older that I get, the more that I resonate with that. It's not just about the month of February. It's you can celebrate and educate all year long. So I know that you were born in Chicago. You lived there until you were about 7.
Mm-hmm.
What was that like for you? Or do you remember what that contrast was coming from Chicago to Seattle, which is diverse, but not necessarily in Black people or other African Americans?
Yeah, it's interesting, Jasmine. One, our family left Chicago because my dad had gotten a job south of Chicago in Champaign.
Okay.
So we had left there probably when I was, in fact, I was 2 years old when they moved, but I stayed behind because my mother was pregnant with my younger brother, Michael. And so I spent I don't know, a year there or so, I guess, with my grandmother, and then later moved to Champaign, and we lived in a housing project, which is no longer there until 7. And I don't have any really meaningful recollections of what it was like to live there. I ate mud pies, rolled in the dirt, went to first grade. There was no connection to like a Black community because I was a kid. I will say that when we used to go back and visit after we got here to Seattle, we'd go back for the summers, like when I was 8, 9, 10, all the way up until I was 12 years old. And there I did have an experience of at least being in for that summer a large black community, but it was like normal, because I'm normal for there. Obviously, very different than the neighborhood that we grew up here in Seattle, which was very diverse in Madrona, because it was nothing but black folks. And but again, we were kids playing in the street. I remember some guy, one of my cousins, telling me that down around the corner at one of the juke joints, that the Curtis Mayfield and the Impressions were out on the street corner singing to the community. I mean, that's the kind of stuff that you do in a big city, when
Yeah.
they were from Chicago. And so Chicago was and is, but particularly back then, was the black community was very alive, and thriving businesses, many of which are now closed and boarded up, just because of the transition that happens in black communities that gets overrun by drugs and poverty. But I don't know if you can imagine being on the south side of Chicago, where there's a million black people, as opposed to living in Seattle, where we're less than 10% of the population.
Yeah.
So our contrast, but again, as kids growing up, it was just kind of normal, just seeing
Right.
black faces, black businesses, and that was just the thing.
Do you think that your summers back in Chicago or visiting in Chicago kind of helped give you more of like that cultural sense, or like kind of opened your eyes more to that? Or like, when did you kind of start to have that realization, maybe more, that there was that lack of diversity? Or
Well, culture is an interesting thing. When it's happening to us, we don't realize it.
right.
Unless you deliberately have parents who are deliberate about saying, this is this, this
Mm-hmm.
is black culture. And my parents weren't like that, because they saw the world. They always saw the world broadly. But I mean, because them growing up in black communities, they were very aware of it. They were very aware of civil rights, so that in our home in Madrona, we watched the evening news, nightly, and saw the attack at Pettus Bridge. We saw the aftermath of the bombing of the 16th Street Baptist Church. We saw these things, visibly, and we marched with Dr. King when he came to Seattle in '61 or '63. So we were a part of that social movement. But even as a kid, I didn't realize what it was,
Yeah.
other than the fact that you saw it on TV, and I knew that Rosa Parks refused to give up her seat. I met her years later, but as a kid growing up, they're just kind of events that are happening around you. You're just kind of living your life as a kid. So culture kind of slaps you upside the head. And culture is an interesting thing in this country. I'm a diversity consultant, and growing up in Madrona. Madrona was like, what we commonly call a melting pot community, but not so much that the cultures blended, because they didn't. They were distinct, cultural differences, and you're aware of them. But on the playground, we lived across the street from Madrona Park, and so there were black kids out there who were my friends. There were Chinese, Japanese, Filipino, Korean, Latino, white, rich and poor. So it was like, because we were on the edge of the red line.
Yeah.
The other interesting thing, Jasmine, is that my parents, even though my mother and father both grew up in Chicago. My mother's family, however, was from Mississippi.
Okay. Mine too.
And my father's family was from Kentucky. In fact, he was born in Kentucky, and so they were part of the migration from that south up into the north. And And so they were very aware of their roots and that those cultural roots as, and so that kind of transcends, kind of transforms a little bit, as to us, to my generation, as we're kind of, without knowing it, learning a little bit of cultural roots. But growing up in that neighborhood and being exposed to all of those different groups and cultures, and my parents, my dad used to have me and my brothers on our hands and knees polishing the hardwood floors.
Oh man.
There was nobody that came in. We were on our hands and knees with the wax and these polishers these little electric polishers and so while we're on our hands and knees, rubbing this wax in, he's playing music, and he's like the conductor. And the music that he's playing on Saturday mornings was La Boheme. I don't know if you're familiar with La Boheme. It's an opera.
Okay, no, I'm not.
Madame Butterfly, the Tales of Hoffmann. These are like dramatic operas, and he's singing the opera, and we're on the floor polishing the floors, and of course we become familiar with the opera songs that he's singing. And he had a love of all kinds of music, and of course on Saturday nights when he had his buddies over, he and my mom and their friends, they're playing, Duke Ellington and Count Basie and Eartha Kitt and Billie Holiday and Dinah Washington, his favorite, so we're hearing all of that.
Yeah.
And no offense to your generation, Jasmine, but we grew up in the greatest era of music. So R&B, birth of R&B.
Yeah, no offense taken. My mother's actually from, that generation. So I luckily can say that I know. I'm blessed to know, yes.
Yeah, so, with the birth of Motown and James Brown, who became a friend years later, he was a friend of mine for 30 years. Through the Panther Party, but hearing his early songs, so we had all of this different kind of music, and we found out very quickly that the reason why they had us polishing those floors was because that Friday night, about 30 of my parents' friends would come over, roll the carpets back, and do Scandinavian dancing.
Now that's not what I expected to hear.
Loud, stomping on the floor, Scandinavian dancing up and down the floor. So we had this exposure to every culture.
Yeah.
One of my parents' friends, they were Jewish. In fact, this Jewish family, there were two Jewish families. One was the Pearl Castle was pretty popular. Her and her husband had been communists. They were part of the Communist Party, so they were activists within themselves. And so we'd go over their place for Passover. So I had my first matzah ball when I'm 12 years old, celebrating Passover.
Yeah.
I didn't know the difference between Passover and Easter. I guess I kind of figured it out at some point. But it's and my two best friends were both white, and they both lived on the other side of the Red Line. We didn't know the Red Line ran down 34th Avenue, but it did. And they lived on the other side on 35th, and they lived in a slightly more upscale neighborhood. One of them even had a maid, but one of them, David, who I ran with probably the most, he was second generation Russian. And we'd go over to his grandmother's house on Christmas, who was she was first generation Russian, and she'd serve these Christmas treats out of Russia, and one of them looked really nasty to me. Should I try it, or do I spit it out and drop it under the table?
Right. Be polite.
Yeah, be polite, but don't let it see me spit it out. It was like a broad cultural experience.
Yeah.
It wasn't until Stokely Carmichael came to town in 1967 that I got my Black identity.
I was gonna actually ask about that because is that when they came and spoke at your school, right? They came and gave a speech or something like that.
He gave a speech at Garfield High in the auditorium, but it was for black people came from all young
Mm,
people came from all over the city. So it wasn't like speaking to Garfield. It was speaking, that's where it
everybody.
happened to be held at
Gotcha.
Garfield in the gymnasium. It was an overflow crowd. There were crowds all in the street with megaphones because it was like a big event. And a lot of young black people, that's where the they got their identity and their mojo, because that was at the height of the beginning of the I'm Black and I'm Proud movement.
Mm-hmm.
And we had never heard nothing like that. We had never seen anything like that up close. And my dad used to make sure that he used to cut our hair, and then we said, Dad, no more nicks. So we went around to the corner barber shop, and Gene, everybody knew Gene on 34th Avenue. He would cut our hair. But after Stokely came, no more haircuts. It was, the afro started growing out,
Yeah.
and that's where this mass awakening, it was happening across the country. Um, and when he came to Seattle, that inspired a lot of young black people to become activists.
Is
Jasmine, say this one thing about that event.
okay.
It spawned several things, and we can talk about those as we go forward. But one of the things that never struck me until years later,
Mm-hmm.
I'm talking about 40 years later, as I was starting to write my book, which is due out here in this summer. And I was thinking about what the hell must have my two best friends thought when I came to school at the start of my senior year in that fall of 67. And I was in an afro, a dark blue snick jacket that had snick on the back, and dark blue pants with shades. I looked I don't like to ever call myself a militant, but I
But
looked, whatever the image of a black militant looked like then, all of a sudden, from my junior year, the end of my junior year, when I'm still almost a black hippie,
mm-hmm.
with my two best white friends, and then into that fall of 67, I lost contact with them, and
I bet.
one of them I haven't seen since high school,
Yeah.
and he actually his family owns the insurance company that insures my business. His dad owned it, and then his dad passed, and so he owns it. And I tried to send messages, and he won't talk to me.
Oh,
And
that's a shame.
I think that he was so shocked from that
Mm,
transformation. The other guy I saw when I got out of, he was my best friend out of the two. He was probably closer. I had been in prison as a political prisoner. And when I got out of prison, I went to what was probably the very first UW street fair. They have this street fair in the UW every year. And I went to the street fair, it said in 1973. And I see him sitting at a booth at a table. He's got a booth selling T-shirts. And he always had this interesting smile, kind of half smile, half not. And he looked at me and was like, we were strangers.
yeah.
Sad, it was sad. And I thought about this 40 years later. What must have gone through their minds, in that brief summer when I came back to school? We were starting the first high school Black Student Union at Garfield. And
Yeah. I actually wanted to touch on that because it sounds like that's right around the time that you did get that started, as well as it sounds like starting the Seattle chapter of the Black Panther Party within
yeah,
the same year. Like you were,
well, they were we did that in the fall. We started the first chapter outside of the state of California.
mhm.
The chapter of BPP started that spring of 68.
Gotcha. Okay.
So, but all of this was on the heels of Stokely. See, when
Mm.
Stokely came and he fired us all up, I
Yeah.
became the co-chair of the Seattle chapter of SNCC, the Student Nonviolent Coordinating Committee.
Okay.
And so me and my buddies, you know, we come to school, and I say my buddies, that included Kathy Jones, who was a young sister, and Kathy was, you know, she was light, bright, and damn near white. And she'll tell you this story. When we were at little Bobby Hutton's funeral, she had the sisters, the rest of the sisters had to put, I think it was bleach in her hair so it would, you know, fluff up into an afro.
Like, yeah, okay, wow.
But anyway, so we when we got to school that fall, we wanted a Black student union.
Yeah.
And there were no Black student unions on the West Coast. We were the first high school Black student union on the West Coast of the United States. And
incredible.
But Larry Gossett and my brother Aaron and a couple other brothers, Carl Miller, E.J. Brisker, had started BSU at the UW.
Okay.
And so we want a BSU at Garfield. And so the principal, of course, told us we couldn't have a BSU. And so we said, well, we'll see about that. And so we did several things to disrupt the flow of, you know, what was going on, like refusing to stand for the national anthem at the pep assemblies. But see, I was in the jazz band, the stage band. So I was on the floor of the gymnasium, and you know, we had to play the national anthem. So the first revolt I did was we all sat down as we played the national anthem. I was playing in the band standing up playing, I'm sitting down.
Right.
And so but I didn't play. I just sat down. I just sat down.
You did it before Kaepernick did it.
Oh, long with 50 years before Kaepernick. And so I got kicked out of school. I'm the only one that got kicked out.
Of course.
Because everybody could see me. No one could see my buddies in the stands, right?
You had the bigger stage at that time.
I had the bigger stage. So I get kicked out. My dad brings me back in. The band instructor tells me, if you're going to be in the jazz band or the stage band, as they called it, you have to play you have to play. If you don't play, you're out. So I wanted to play because I love my music. So the next week, I sat down and I played sitting down.
Okay.
So they got me kicked out again. They brought back in. and then we did this chant, Bing, Bing, Ungawa, Black Power. And I led it because I'm down on the floor again. That got cheers. I got called into the principal's office again. And then so we called the all school boycott. And here's the interesting thing, Jasmine.
Mm-hmm.
The administration must have known, you know, the word got out, but they probably thought, it's a handful of these Black students are not going to class. We'll deal with them when it happens. But what they underestimated and didn't realize is that all them white kids, all those Asian kids, the Black kids, the brown kids, we had all gone to school together in middle school, and we knew each other.
Yeah.
And this was our senior year.
So you guys didn't really care at that point.
Man, when we called that boycott, nobody went to class. and the crowds were all jammed. The halls were jammed in front of the administration office. So he gave in and gave us the BSU. That's how that BSU got started.
So you weren't definitely not afraid to ruffle any feathers to get where you needed or what you guys wanted.
No, that wasn't part of our dictionary. Afraid.
What was one of the riskiest things that you did during that time to make a stand or to get a message across? Like, you know,
I'd say probably at that time was when, and this was several months later. This was into the spring now and I had already been arrested once over that time before this event that I'm about to tell you, when there was a riot broke out down at outside of Franklin High School at a popular restaurant that all the kids used to go to after the football games. Dags was right there where the car wash used to be down there on MLK and Rainier, right across the street from the high school. And I'm coming back from playing in the jazz band for a high school basketball game, and I just show up and there's a cop that's got this sister, Linda Rodriguez, on the ground with his billy club, and I go to ask her if she's all right. Can I help you up? And the cop throws me and handcuffs me and takes me to jail. And next thing I know, I've got a charge, not jail, but juvie, for I'm charged with inciting a riot. Well, so months later, we get a call from the brothers and sisters over at Franklin, and they've been having a hard time at Franklin. they wanted to try to organize a Black Studies program at BSU. They're not getting anywhere. Black kids are getting kicked out for fighting with white kids. White kids sent back to class. A sister shows up with an afro. The vice principal tells her that, kicks her out of school and tells her she can come back when she has an appropriate hairdo. And so they said, we need you guys to help us. So they contacted Larry and my brother Aaron and us at Garfield. And so we went over and we met with them at what was known as the Beanery back then, which was a little place where the kids got sandwiches and stuff right across the street from Franklin. And so they told us what was going on, and it was no hesitation. We said, okay, let's go. We walked out, walked straight across the street, walked up into the principal's office and said, get out. We're taking over. We kicked the principal out, the vice principal out, the secretary, whoever else was in there. And we took over the principal's office and occupied the school overnight.
Oh my goodness.
Oh yeah, we stayed all night. We said we ain't leaving until they get there, till you meet these demands. So the next morning, that was probably the riskiest thing at that point.
That definitely sounds pretty risky.
Well, I got to tell you, they kind of build up from there, because the next day the principal calls and we answer the phone like we're the office, Franklin High School, and he says they can have their demands. So we leave. A week later, I'm in my geometry class. The phone rings and teacher says they want you in the principal's office. I said, okay, yeah, that's not unusual. As soon as I step out of the door, there's 2 detectives there who handcuff me and read me my rights and take me off to juvie. My brother, Aaron, Larry Gossett, EJ Brisker, Carl Miller are being arrested simultaneously.
Oh man.
And they got 5 or 6 of us, 7 of us off the streets and in either juvie or in jail. Well, within the hour, as soon as I get into juvie and get into my cell with my, it's got like they have these big, they're not cells, they're like holding areas where you, with all the other kids that are in there, or a certain section, whatever. Well, I see on the TV, the streets are burning. There's a picture of the streets burning across the country. Well, that's because MLK was assassinated within that same time frame that we were arrested. It was almost like they knew that MLK either was assassinated or was getting assassinated, and they got us off the streets before, so that we couldn't be out there leading any efforts. And so after my mother got me out, my mother came and got me out that night, got Aaron out the next day. Aaron and I went down to, where Broadmoor is in Madison Park. Okay, so there's a golf course out there. So we snuck in through the Arboretum.
Oh, I heard about this.
Oh yeah, we burned with a can of gasoline and burned a big BP on the 13th hole.
Oh yeah.
But that was the kind of start of, we didn't know what was going to unfold later, but that was the start of us, not only being advocates, but standing up and fighting back. And it was a week later it was a few days later, not a week, that we had gotten permission to travel to out of state, because we were both several of us had been under arrest. We had to get permission. I had to get permission from my juvenile judge to travel out of state so that we could attend the West Coast Conference of Black Student Unions at San Francisco State University. And that night, that Friday night, the first night of the conference, was the speaker, none other than Chairman Bobby Seale. And Bobby gave the most fiery speech that I had ever heard before or since. And the reason, Jasmine, is because 2 days after MLK was assassinated, the first member to join the Black Panther Party, little Bobby Hutton, was murdered in the streets of Oakland while in police custody, shot 30 times by police bullets. And Bobby was pissed. He was mad. And you could literally, Jasmine, see like the line drawn in the stand, because there's several hundred Black students there, with their afros, from universities across the West Coast for this conference. And Bobby talked about spilling blood in the streets. So you could see the line drawn in the sand.
Yeah.
Students who were scared to death, didn't want nothing to do with it. And those few of us who said, we ready to die, we the group of us from Seattle, me and my brother and a couple other people, we made a beeline to Bobby Seale and said, we want to start a chapter of the Black Panther Party. That's where it began, right there in that moment.
That's beautiful. And it's not beautiful, but the events that led to that, to create something like that, that's incredible. That really is. Mr. Dixon, I don't want to cut things short. I feel like I could keep talking to you, but we are unfortunately out of time.
You can invite me back for part 2 anytime, Jasmine.
It's been great speaking with you and learning more about your impact. Thank you so much again for your time, and happy Black History Month.
Happy Black History Month. And you ain't heard but a drop of the story.